Good morning. Good morning. All right. Well, I'm probably the first person on YouTube to do a book review in a tank top. Shout out to Dr. Jason Campbell. If you watch his page, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's a PhD PhD of philosophy, and he says that he wants to lecture one time in a wife beater and a tank top. So tank top, wife beater. We don't call it that no more. That's whack. I agree with that. I think I don't understand why people call it that. That's not cool. Domestic violence sucks. Anyway, book I want to tell you about today that I'm reading is called The World That Made New Orleans, From Spanish Silver to Congo Square. The author is this guy, Ned Sublette. I thought this book was excellent, being born and raised in New Orleans. A lot of this stuff I remember like from high school in Louisiana history, but what made it interesting, and I think anybody that talks about the history of Louisiana, I mean, even the South, but when you start talking about Louisiana and New Orleans, and if you don't include the captive Africans, like, you're really making a mistake. You really are just wasting your time, I mean, he goes into good detail about like Congo Square and how music, American world music, was actually created there, because New Orleans was a French colony at one time. It was a part of the French, what they would call the French Empire in the New World. And also what's called Haiti now. It was Saint Domingo at the time. I don't know if that's pronouncing it right, but he goes and he explains how, the revolution, Toussaint Louverture, Haitian Revolution, and how many of the people, the free people of color, and the slaves that were in Haiti at the time, after the revolution, a lot of them left. Some of them went to Puerto Rico. Some of them went to Eastern Cuba, Santiago, and they brought that music with them. Whereas, and most of the slaves from that part were from the Congo. So he goes all the way back and he talks about, the music of Cuba, the music of Puerto Rico, Bamba, which I didn't know anything about, He goes all the way back even to like the African music, the Congo and the Senegambia. I really enjoyed this book. I said I was going to stay away from, the African history, the African American history, because I studied it so much, when I was young, but I can't help myself. It's an addiction. This was one of the books. I was just walking around in the library and I just actually saw it. I don't know, I think maybe Amazon or something. And I said, oh, I'm going to get this book. I'm definitely going to read it, But I mean, it was so interesting. I'm so, hooked on that kind of stuff. And I think everybody should. I mean, the contribution to New Orleans culture by enslaved Africans, if you take that away, you don't have a culture. I mean, you don't. You have no culture if you take that away. And that's why in school it was so boring, because we're looking at like, okay, you're talking about Bienville and Iberville and maybe a few Indians or whatever, Native Americans, but come on, man. If you open your eyes, who's influenced this culture. From the second lines to the Mardi Gras Indians. He does a whole chapter on the Mardi Gras Indians, which actually I didn't know anything about. I would see them sometimes when I used to go out there, when I was younger, going to Mardi Gras and second lines and stuff, but I had no idea about that. I would see it on TV, how they make their suits, but he goes into the history of it. And I learned a lot just from that. I knew a lot about Congo Square and the music from that. And, Even this lady I used to work with, she was an older lady, and she would tell me how Armstrong Park on Rampart and all that, Treme, that used to all be houses. If you know anything about New Orleans, you know what I'm talking about. She said that was all houses at one time by the Covenant House, and that was like the black section of town. And Congo Square, I actually might pass there today because I have to go downtown for something. But anyway, excellent book. You know, he also goes into the intra-slave trade, where you had people breeding slaves from Virginia and Maryland because you had so much work in Louisiana. The Louisiana Purchase, the territory, they needed so much work. Slaves became so valuable that people were actually breeding slaves in Virginia. You know, this is where my great grandparents are from. Well, my 7-time grandparents are from Virginia. You know, and on the other side is Maryland. And I always wondered, you know, if you start looking at the census, you know, I was doing my own family tree or whatever. You start looking at the census around 1870, 1880, you see all the black, they'll say, where are they born? A lot of them, Virginia. He goes into all that and explain why that happened. You know, even the novel that the book that I'm working on right now is about, you know, Louisiana, and the older people at that time were from Virginia or Maryland. And I'm going to talk more about that, about my own family tree or whatever. But I'm just waiting till my son get a little older so we can do it together. And he goes into some of the dances that they did in all the different places and how the dances traveled. He goes into voodoo, the African religion, and shows, okay, why is it so prominent in New Orleans? Because you had all these people that came from Haiti, came from Cuba, and man, they brought it here. And if you travel, I've traveled throughout the United States with my old job. I was working on a cruise ship, and there's no place like New Orleans. And I finally, I always knew, but I couldn't really put it together. This guy put it together he put it together beautifully. You know, that Caribbean, you know, that Caribbean feeling, you know, that we have is, you know, we're kind of losing it now because, you know, the internet, everywhere you go is becoming the same. So it's I think maybe in I give it probably about 2 generations to where the whole world will be the same. You know, it's getting like that now. Everywhere you go, people dress alike, people talk alike. There's no regionalism anymore because everybody's connected. I can be living in France and all my friends are in Texas and I can talk to them every day. So, you know, there's no real regionalism. Even with the radio stations, everything is nationwide. You know, you got the Steve Harvey show and all that. I tell your mom at one time, you would have the local radio stations and they would talk about what's going on locally. But I don't think in about 20 years, I think all that's going to be over. You'll be under a one world government, you know, and everybody will be the same. Everybody will say the same things. We'll all be buying all our stuff from Amazon. So I think that culture is probably going to be lost. So, you know, that's just my opinion. So I think we ought to just write it down and document it because eventually all that is going to be lost. I mean, there's still the second lines in New Orleans. There's still a lot of this in New Orleans, but even the people my age really don't have no idea of where it comes from. And I would bet my right arm that, you know, people younger than me have any idea about, you know, the history of it, you know. So, but I thought this book was excellent, man. Excellent. And another thing, some of the people that he described, it's like the streets are named after these people. And I'm like, okay, that's why that street is named after that person. You know, he has Claiborne and, you know, but you got to be from New Orleans. If you spend time in New Orleans, you understand. So more of a regional book, but I enjoyed it. If you want to know anything more about New Orleans and the history of it and how the African culture is dominant culture. I read an article one time that said that New Orleans is the most African city in North America. And that's probably right. You know, you got some places in Florida, Jacksonville and Miami. Well, it used to be Miami. Some of the places around Miami, because Miami is more Hispanic, but some of the places around Miami, some little towns, that's you got a lot of African influence. But other than that, I mean, South Carolina, you go to South Carolina, North Carolina, the islands, Gull Islands, that's a whole nother story. But they pretty, but yeah, I think they're kind of right as far as New Orleans, because you got that African influence. It was able to be fostered there, and not like any other places. In other places, they were repressed. I think as far more north you go, it starts repressing more. Even Mississippi had more Africans there, but the repression there was a lot more brutal than it was, in New Orleans. So, okay, well, that's the book. I suggest that book. I don't do ratings. If you're interested, check it out. Peace.